You're listening to the Future Tech Podcast with Richard Jacobs. Future technologies such as artificial intelligence, stem cells, 3D printing, gene editing, Bitcoin, blockchain, the microbiome, quantum computing, virtual reality, and exploring space are much closer than you might think. In fact, many early versions of these technologies are in play right now, and the companies that are using these technologies are the focus of this podcast. My goal for you, the listener, is to learn from these podcasts. You may very well learn something that may change the course of your life for the better, steer you towards a new career, or give you insight into addressing a thorny medical problem. Remember, this podcast and its content is informational in nature only. No medical, tax, legal, financial, or psychological advice is being given. If you've enjoyed the podcast, please listen, subscribe, like, and tell your friends about it. Thank you. Hello, this is Richard Jacobs with the Future Tech and Future Tech Health podcast. I have Dr. Jeffrey A. Morgan. He's a cardiac surgeon, does bypass surgery, mitral and aortic valve surgery, insertion of heart pumps called LVADs, and heart transplants. He's also the chief medical officer for BIOLIFE4D. So, Dr. Morgan, thanks for coming. How are you doing?
I'm doing really well. Thank you very much for having me today.
Yeah. So, in addition to the surgeon, what are you working on as the chief medical officer at BioLife?
Well, we're working on something that's very, very exciting at BioLife4D. We are developing a bioartificial heart, and this is going to address the significant need for organs today in patients with advanced heart failure. What I mean by that is there are thousands of patients who need heart transplantations, but we cannot meet that need with the organs that are currently available. There just simply aren't enough donors to be able to accommodate all the patients with advanced heart failure who need heart transplantation. At BioLife4D, we are working on developing a artificial bioheart, which is basically a heart that's made from human cells, from a patient's cells.
From the patient themselves or from a donor?
From a patient themselves. And what it also, the other major advantage in addition to availability of the organ is also the lack of rejection because the cells are made from the patient himself or herself. The body will not reject the heart, which is unlike today when you receive a donor heart. It comes from another individual, unfortunately, an individual who has been pronounced brain dead, who has graciously agreed to donate their organs. But unfortunately, one of the major problems with heart transplantation today is rejection. And these patients basically need to be on chronic, lifelong anti-rejection medications in order to minimize the rejection. You never fully get rid of the rejection, but you minimize it. And the problem is that by suppressing the immune system, you make the patient much more susceptible to infection. So in many ways, transplantation today is really trading one disease for another. And what I mean by that is you give the patient a new heart, but you open them up to a lifelong risk of infection and rejection. And, because we don't have any other therapy today, it's obviously the gold standard today. But at BioLife4D, we're working on developing a different solution to this problem that will not be associated with rejection and also will not be associated with the high incidence of infection because these patients will not need to take immunosuppression.
So what kind of cells are you culturing? Are you doing induced pluripotent stem cells from bone marrow or blood? Or
well, right now we're looking at different types of cells. We have a few different models that we're looking at. We have made a lot of progress. We recently were able to create a mini heart which was a huge, huge milestone and happened earlier than we thought it would happen when we initially formulated the company. Development of a bioheart has been a major, major milestone. And actually, it can not only be used as a model for a future heart, but it actually has a lot of benefits in and of itself in terms of testing drugs and looking at cardiac toxicity in a small model rather than needing to do that through animal models, which is more expensive and has a lot of ethical and animal related issues.
Yeah, they call them organoids, right?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, basically, by creating this mini heart, different drug companies will be able to test their drug and look for cardiac toxicity without going through the usual mechanism of giving the drug to animals, surviving the animal, looking at toxicity, sacrificing the animal, looking at their organs, looking at their heart. So it's a major breakthrough and something we're very, very excited about.
I've talked to some organ on or chip people, and one company they linked, I believe it was the liver and kidney modules, and they saw some effects that they did not see just by one alone. Is there any science out there to link organoid systems, link heart and lungs, et cetera, or heart and liver to see what behaviors you might observe?
We haven't had. That's a great idea, fascinating idea, and it might actually happen in the future. We haven't had any direct discussions along those lines yet. Probably only because it's been so recent. It happened fairly recently that we actually were successful in developing this bioheart. But that's a great idea, and certainly something that I think we may see in the future.
Yeah, the reason I ask, and I don't know the specifics, I'd have to dig, but there was a drug that they said, was toxic to the kidney, and they tried a different formulation of it, and it wasn't toxic to the kidney when it was the kidney alone, but when they hooked up liver and kidney, they saw the liver process the drug and made a metabolite that was then toxic to the kidney. So it showed them a mechanism that they missed. So that's why maybe if, again, I haven't heard of anyone connecting organoids, but if it's possible, it might be interesting to look at that. It might show you, better ways to get the heart going.
That's a phenomenal idea. I can't say that we've had discussions around that subject. So thank you for that idea. That certainly something that I'll take back to our team and discuss with them. It certainly makes sense. Perhaps to not look at something in isolation in terms of its cardiac toxicity, but to look at it in association with other organs. So, I think in general, the future of testing drugs may move in this direction because it's currently so expensive, right? Hundreds of millions, even billions of dollars to test drugs. And all the animal testing and clinical trials, this might be not a be all end all, but this might be a precursor. It might be one of the preliminary steps that can replace a lot of the current preliminary steps that are right now much more expensive.
Have you identified if there's a microbiome associated with the heart or with any other organ for that matter, but specifically the heart? Has that been looked for?
I don't know. When you say microbiome, tell me, just be a little more specific.
Well, we have a gut microbiome, and I know in the lungs too, there are also bacteria that are resident there. I wonder if in internal organs like the heart, liver, et cetera, if they have microbes associated with them. I don't know if anyone's ever looked, but I wonder if that happens, and if so, would it modulate the function of the organ? Maybe that's being ignored if no one's even looked for it.
Yeah. Good point. Generally we think of the heart as being sterile, not having any bacteria associated with it. And when there is bacteria, it can of course cause myocarditis, or it can cause endocarditis or other infections, of the heart. But that's an interesting process that you describe, and something I'll look into a little bit more.
Yeah, well, as you said, if certain bacteria are known to inflame the heart and cause it problems, and they got there somehow, maybe that means that there are natural bacteria that hang out around it. I don't know. I know it's way out there, but just wanted to point it out maybe as a thought process.
Yeah. No, it's it's a really interesting phenomenon. I need to look into that. So many things we don't know.
Oh, I know. So the heart organoids you make, where do the constituent cells come from? Like, where are they cultured from?
So we have different models that we're looking at now. There are bone marrow cells that we're looking at. There are other progenitor cells that we're looking at as well. We haven't settled in completely on the model yet.
Well, is there a preferred, have you tried to make heart organoids from different constituent cells? And, is it harder to differentiate them if they're from bone marrow versus some other kind of cell? What if you take the myocardial cells themselves and, put them back to their pluripotent state and then use them to make the heart? Are you noticing any differences depending on the constituency of what you're starting with?
Yeah, I can't say that we have enough information yet to really answer that yet, in terms of the different locations and the actual process. We're still in the relatively early stage, but that type of question, probably I have to really consult more with the chief scientific officer of the company to really delve deeply into the type of cells and what the different models are right now.
Well, the organoid itself, like, how many different functions of the heart are you trying to model? Are you trying to do all of them or just one? And how many different?
Well, we're trying to model,
make it effective.
Yeah. So we're modeling the entire heart. So our goal is to create all the structures of the heart, the different chambers of the heart, 4 chambers: right atrium, right ventricle, left atrium, left ventricle, the 4 valves of the heart: tricuspid and mitral valve, aortic and pulmonic valve, the arteries, the main arteries, coronary arteries that run on the heart, the veins as well, and the coronary sinus, the aorta. So there are multiple different cell types that we are dealing with, and it's a complex structure to recreate the heart, and not just to recreate it, but to recreate it in such a way that can handle the blood pressure. It can beat in a coordinated fashion, just like we have with the native heart right now.
In the current organoids that are being created, what functions I know you're trying to do all of them, but are you having to do a subset in order to make it work?
Yeah, that is our goal, is to make it work, is to create a heart that simulates the human heart as it is right now, a heart that's able to beat, sustain the blood pressure, receive blood on the right side, pump it to the lungs, have it come back, and have the blood go out to the organs from the left side. And it's a complex process. This mini heart is definitely a major step in the right direction.
So when someone has heart failure, does that mean the whole heart tends to fail, or is it more like the left ventricle? If maybe you might not have to make a whole new heart. What if you can make part of a heart that just addresses like the most common issue that people have in heart failure?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. Usually it's the left side of the heart that fails, although sometimes both sides of the heart fail. We have devices now that we put into patients who need just the left-sided device called an LVAD, left ventricular assist device. Those devices work well for patients who have left-sided heart failure. The problem, though, is even those patients, most of them have some degree of right-sided heart failure, and they still have quite a bit of symptoms after the LVAD due to right heart failure. They can also have arrhythmias. They can have valvular problems, leaky valves that cause issues and problems. So even though their heart failure is primarily left-sided, they still have significant clinical consequences or sequelae from the right side and from the valves.
Okay. So the thought is it's better to just try to do the whole heart replacement instead of, making it into sort of organic cyborg and, just adding on parts of it. I just figured that might be easier. What if you're able to only make an LVAD, but a biologically based one? I know it wouldn't solve everything, but maybe that's an easier task than an entire heart Because it's so complicated.
Yeah, it's a super interesting question. I mean, wow, this conversation's been very enlightening. It's been amazing for me. I have to thank you. You've really planted some interesting ideas in my mind. Thank you.
Oh, good.
That's quite an interesting question. You know, whether you can create a bioheart just for the left side and do an operation where you somehow resect the left atrium and left ventricle and implant a new bioheart, just left atrium, left ventricle. Very, very interesting. Again,
Well,
that's not something that.
what if you don't resect, but you're able to implant something upstream or downstream? Even if, like, let's say you have a low ejection fraction, you can implant an assist downstream of that side of the heart or that half of the heart and leave the heart in place, but just assist it that way.
Right. Yeah, that's, interesting. It's that type of concept we see in something called a heterotopic heart transplant, where we actually leave a native heart in place. We put a new heart in a different location. So yeah, that would be, a possible way to do it. But just, in general, the concept that you bring up or mention, which is to basically just address the left side of the heart in a bioartificial fashion, whether it be orthotopic or heterotopic, meaning whether you resect the heart or not resect the heart, is very, very interesting. The model that we're working on, is cardiac replacement.
Right.
There have been, and that comes from, the thought that it would be a better solution if you removed the whole heart and you took the right side out of the equation, you took the valves out of the equation,
Right.
so you don't have to deal with a lot of the problems that we see now with patients who have either an LVAD or a mechanical artificial heart.
So, I don't know. It sounds like a crazy challenge. What are some of, like, the early stumbling blocks that the companies run into? And if you're able to say, but what are some of the big challenges that are right here, right now, that you need to overcome to move forward?
Well, we set up goals for ourselves, incremental base hits, as our CEO Steve likes to say in a really, enlightening fashion, which is, our home run or grand slam, so to speak, is to develop the bioheart. But there are a number of challenges associated with that. Just developing a chamber, developing a valve, developing a coronary artery, developing an aorta. So we've actually identified a number of base hits. Again, that terminology from Steve, which we've all adopted, which is, what are some goals, initial goals that we can set along the way of the home run of developing the heart? And that is, number one, to develop a valve, which in and of itself would be very, very useful if we had a bio valve, let's say a mitral valve or an aortic valve, because of the problems associated with artificial valves that are taken off the shelf, either prosthetic valves, bioprosthetic valves, or mechanical valves. They have limited shelf, they have limited lifespan. You have to go on blood thinners. So there are many problems. So if we could develop a bioartificial valve, that would be very, very beneficial. So that's one of our goals. The other one is developing a graft, so aortic tissue, in situations where you need to replace the aorta. Something that we're looking at also is arteries and veins, just developing arteries and veins. So yeah, there are definitely a lot of challenges associated with each of those. We have an amazing team. Our chief scientific team is really incredible. They've been recruited from the institute. Ravi, our chief scientific officer, led that laboratory or was instrumental in that laboratory for many years. We were fortunate enough to recruit him, and his whole career has really been about developing substitutes for heart transplantation in terms of bioartificial therapies. And he recruited several other people. So we have an amazing team, our board and our advisors. And, Steve really has put together sort of what I like to call the who's who of bioprinting and bioartificial heart therapy around the country. If you take a look at our website and you see all the amazing people Steve has recruited to the company. It's really an amazing group of individuals. So I think, it's a huge, huge task. And if there's one company that I think is going to be able to get it done, it's our company. But it's going to be a real long-term project and challenge. But, again, the base hits, so to speak, the mini heart, the valves, the aorta, we're very focused on those right now. And so far they are really going very well.
As a surgeon, I don't know, is there anything that your company could do to make it easier for you to do your job or make it more successful? Like, have you looked at it from that point of view, the surgery aspect? Like, what can be done, again, to help heart surgeons?
Yeah, as a surgeon, the first major challenge of a heart transplant is the entry, is getting in. And if a patient's had previous surgery, particularly if they've had an LVAD, it makes it very, very challenging. There's a lot of scar tissue. So this process will help surgically because hopefully it will minimize the need for LVADs if we have a bioartificial heart therapy readily available. So first off, it makes it, as a surgeon, it makes the entry much easier. From the actual connection point of view, the major connections we perform at a heart transplant are the left atrium, the inferior vena cava, the superior vena cava, the pulmonary artery, and the aorta. Those 5 connections. And, our goal with the bioartificial heart is to replicate that as much as possible, meaning we want a cardiac transplant surgeon who's familiar with heart transplant to be able to do this operation with not much additional training, meaning we want it to look like a heart. We want it to be sewn in like a heart. We want the operation to be fairly similar to a regular heart transplant.
Okay, makes sense. Yeah, I just wonder what it would be like one day to be doing, like, again, a biological based LVAD or a whole heart instead of a mechanical heart transplant. I don't know how it would change the experience. Obviously the success rate, but that's what I want to ask you. I don't know if there's anything, again, from the surgeon's perspective, but okay, that answers it.
Yeah,
well,
I think.
Yeah.
I was going to say, it changes also from a surgical perspective. It hopefully is going to bring patients to the operating room earlier in the process. Right now when patients come for heart transplant, they're super, super sick. They've often had an LVAD. They've been hospitalized many, many times with heart failure. If we have a bioartificial heart that's readily available, hopefully it leads to us being able to operate on patients even earlier in the process. And as a surgeon, that's associated with better outcomes.
Yeah, this is probably remedial stuff, but what are the major methods of heart failure? How does it happen most frequently?
Most frequently from coronary artery disease. It can be from hypertension. It could be from an infection of the heart or the valves. It could be from congenital heart disease. We see a whole variety of patients. When it comes eventually to a transplant, that's when they all coalesce. That's when they all really come together. And how we treat those patients is there's certain common principles that we apply across the board, regardless of whether you had heart failure caused by coronary artery disease or hypertension or an infection.
Okay. I know in some cases the heart dilates and grows big and it can't work efficiently. And in some cases there's heart attacks that literally cause dead patches in the heart and just reduce its ability to pump. And I just didn't know if there's any more to it than that. It's very, very common what happens to the heart.
Yeah, exactly. Some processes cause the heart to thin out and dilate, others to get really thick. Others, the cavity gets obliterated. So there are whole different, the valves could be abnormal. There are many, many different mechanisms, that cause heart failure. But ultimately, once they end up on the operating room table and you're doing a transplant, we try to apply certain principles across the board.
Yeah, and last question or so. This is more to like your surgery work. What's it like to do a heart transplant on someone? Is it, what is it? Does it feel
I don't know, what does it feel like?
Well, it feels great. It's a fascinating thing. It makes all the training and long hours worthwhile as a surgeon, as a doctor, because it gives a patient a second chance at life. And what I mean by that is you take someone who, without this therapy, would not be alive in 1 year, and you basically give them a median survival of 12 years. And the opportunity to be with their family, their kids. You get to know their spouse, their children, their family and friends who come for the visits and who are there during the surgery. So you really have a very immediate sense of the impact you're having on this individual and their family. It's a great feeling.
Okay. And for you, were you, I don't know, you've I don't want to put it, graphically, but you've opened up people's chests. You've, I guess, seen a beating heart. You've touched one and held one. And how did you think that affected you? I don't know. How has it affected your outlook on things?
Well, it taught me how precious life is and how you can't take life for granted. And, the old cliche that if you don't have your health, you don't have anything. Many people, they forget that, and they get focused on different isolated burdens in their life, which are very significant. I'm not minimizing that, but if all of a sudden those or things that you thought were very significant and major problems become very small, and they go very low on your list if you don't have your health. And certainly your heart, when you have heart failure and you get short of breath with walking and activity, and you can't sleep at night because your heart is failing, all of a sudden you look at life differently. So facing that situation with patients, having those conversations on a daily basis, emphasizes that to me on a daily basis.
Okay, well, excellent. So last question. So it's hard to say, but what's the timeline, do you think, for BioTime to get a 3D printed heart up and running? How many years? Is it just, who knows, or what's the thought?
Oh, it's hard to say. The team is hard at work. The mini heart came much sooner than we thought. Ravi and his team are working on other things right now, other base hits, so to speak. So it's hard to put a timeline, on the actual BioHeart, but I'm certainly hoping it happens pretty soon because we have lots of patients who need it.
Definitely. Okay, well, very good. What's the best way for people to find out more about progress? Read papers or check out the company's website? Where should they go?
Yeah, BIOLIFE4D. You can check out the company's website. You can Google all the different press releases and different activities, interviews that our CEO, Steve, has given, or Ravi, our Chief Scientific Officer. There's a lot on YouTube as well. Also Facebook and other social media sites.
Excellent. Well, Dr. Morgan, thanks for coming on the podcast. I really appreciate it.
No, thank you very much. It was a pleasure. Thanks for having me.
You're listening to the Future Tech Podcast with Richard Jacobs. Future technologies such as artificial intelligence, stem cells, 3D printing, gene editing, Bitcoin, blockchain, the microbiome, quantum computing, virtual reality, and exploring space are much closer than you might think. In fact, many early versions of these technologies are in play right now, and the companies that are using these technologies are the focus of this podcast. My goal for you, the listener, is to learn from these podcasts. You may very well learn something that may change the course of your life for the better, steer you towards a new career, or give you insight into addressing a thorny medical problem. Remember, this podcast and its content is informational in nature only. No medical, tax, legal, financial, or psychological advice is being given. If you've enjoyed the podcast, please listen, subscribe, like, and tell your friends about it. Thank you.